It didn't move. The creature, massive, muscle-dense, built like something that had never lost a fight in its entire evolutionary history, simply sat. Not because it was restrained, not because it was sedated, not because it had been broken, because the small human beside it said one word: sit. Commander Veth-Oran had cataloged over 400 species in her 17 years of deep-field xenobiology. She had observed predators, real ones, animals that made her crew check their weapons just from the sound of breathing. She thought she understood violence. She thought she understood power. She had never seen anything like this. The creature, the humans called it a dog, hadn't flinched, hadn't hesitated. It dropped its enormous frame onto the floor of the observation deck with complete willingness. Its eyes, deep and amber and alert, stayed locked on the human's face. Not with fear, not with submission born of pain, with devotion. Veth-Oran's secondary heart skipped a beat. She pressed her palm against the glass. "Liaison Reyes," she said slowly, her translator clipping the edges of her words. "That animal, its bite force classifications, you sent us the data before boarding." Specialist Elena Reyes looked up from her console, young by human standards, calm in that unsettling human way, relaxed in situations where every other species tensed. "Yeah, shepherd mix, about 450 newtons. Why? It could remove your hand. Probably, yeah. And yet it obeys you." Elena tilted her head, the faintest smile. "He's not obeying me. That's my colleague, Marcus's dog. Duke he listens. That's what they do." That's what they do. Veth-Oran turned back to the glass. Marcus, the human engineer assigned to the Joint Station project, was now crouching in front of the animal. He said something quiet. The dog's tail began moving, fast, rhythmic, a physical expression of something that looked remarkably like joy. Then Marcus extended his hand, and the creature pressed its enormous head into his palm. Willingly. Veth-Oran had spent 3 years studying human biology. She knew about their pain tolerance, their endurance, the way adrenaline turned them into something almost unrecognizable in crisis situations. She knew humans were, by most measurable metrics, dangerous. But this was different. This was a predator, a real one, with teeth and weight and instinct, choosing, actively and continuously, to be gentle, because a human asked it to. She pulled up the dog's file again. Canis lupus familiaris, descended from apex hunters, pack hierarchy, territorial, capable of tracking, chasing, subduing prey across kilometers, and it was currently rolling onto its back so Marcus could scratch its stomach. "Liaison Reyes," Veth-Oran's voice came out quieter than she intended. "How long have humans kept these animals?" Elena didn't hesitate. "About 15,000 years, give or take." 15,000 years. Veth-Oran stared at the dog, at its closed eyes, its absolute unguarded trust, at the way it had surrendered every instinct of self-preservation to the hands of a human. Then she looked at Marcus, and for the first time she wondered if the dog wasn't the most remarkable thing in that room. She wondered if it was the human who had made it this way. That thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. 15,000 years. Veth-Oran kept turning that number over in her mind like a stone with something dangerous underneath it. Her own people, the Veth Corps, had domesticated their primary livestock animal, the groon, roughly 3,000 years ago. It had taken generations of careful breeding, controlled environments, selective pressure. Even now, a groon required restraints during medical examination. Even now, handlers carried deterrent rods. 3,000 years, and they still hadn't fully won. Humans had taken a predator, a pack hunter with cooperative intelligence and weapons built into its jaw, and in 15,000 years, they hadn't just tamed it, they had made it love them. "Tell me how it started," Veth-Oran said. Elena leaned back in her chair, the casual posture that still unnerved Veth-Oran after 6 weeks aboard the joint station. Humans occupied space differently than other species, like they'd never learned to be prey. "Honestly, we're not totally sure," Elena said. "Best theory is wolves started following human camps, scavenging, and somewhere along the line, the ones that were less afraid, the ones that could tolerate being close to us, they got fed. They survived better, had more pups." "So it was accidental?" "At first, maybe, but then we started choosing, keeping the calm ones, the ones that listened, the ones that seemed to," she paused, searching, "want to be near us." Veth-Oran absorbed this. Selection. Humans had looked at a predator and begun sculpting it, not with cages, not with fear, with preference, with reward, with something that in every species she'd studied was exclusively reserved for members of one's own kind, with affection. "Duke," Veth-Oran said the name carefully. "He was bred for this behavior?" "For the general traits, sure. Loyal, trainable, good temperament." Elena glanced through the glass. Marcus had stood up again, and Duke had immediately repositioned, sitting at his left side, alert, watching the same direction Marcus was watching. The dog's attention was absolute, not the locked focus of a predator calculating distance and timing, but something more sophisticated. He was reading him, learning him, continuously, in real time. "He anticipates," Veth-Oran said softly. It wasn't a question. "Every time," Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes in that way that meant the emotion was genuine. "Marcus doesn't even have to speak sometimes. Duke just knows." A predator that had learned to read a human so precisely it could predict intention before action. Veth-Oran's secondary heart did the thing again, because she just realized something. Duke wasn't simply obedient, he wasn't simply loyal. He was, by any functional definition she could apply, socially intelligent, calibrated specifically to one human, an organic biosystem fine-tuned over a lifetime to understand one particular member of another species better than most beings understood their own kin. And Marcus had no idea how extraordinary that was. That was the part that truly unsettled her. Humans never seemed to realize what they'd actually built. What exactly were they capable of without realizing it? She requested access to the training sessions. Marcus agreed without hesitation, another human trait that continually disoriented her. Other species negotiated access. They asked why, demanded context, consulted hierarchy. Marcus just shrugged and said, sure, he loves an audience. The dog loved an audience. Veth-Oran brought her junior researcher, Pelavix, a young Veth Corps male on his first deep field assignment. He'd been skeptical of her fixation. She could see it in the angle of his crest, that particular tilt that meant, you're overthinking a primitive species again. He stopped tilting his crest approximately 40 seconds into the session. Marcus stood in the center of the open deck space, Duke beside him. No restraints, no barriers between the animal and the two aliens observing from 6 meters away. Nothing but open floor and trust. Heel, Marcus said. Duke moved, precisely to Marcus's left, matching his pace, his gaze forward, his massive frame somehow compressed, not tense, not afraid, just controlled, deliberate, like he understood this was a performance that required a certain shape of himself. Sit. He sat. Down. He dropped, chin toward the floor, eyes still tracking Marcus's face. Stay. Marcus walked away. 10 steps, 20, turned his back completely. Duke didn't move. Pelavix made a sound beside her, a low, involuntary click from deep in his throat. The Veth Corps equivalent of a sharp inhale. She understood. She'd made the same sound privately the first time she'd seen it. Because this wasn't compliance through fear. Fear would have shown in the body, the tension, the flattened ears, the eyes tracking for escape routes. She knew animal fear. She documented it across dozens of species. This was choice. Active, continuous, renewed, and every second Marcus's back remained turned. Nobody was watching Duke. Nobody was enforcing the command. The predator simply waited because it had been asked to. "Release," Marcus called, without turning. Duke was on his feet in an instant, crossing the distance at a full run, and when he reached Marcus, he didn't jump, he pressed his entire side against Marcus's leg, tail sweeping the air. Marcus's hand dropped to the dog's head automatically, a reflex, like breathing. Pelavix turned to her slowly, his crest fully lowered. "Commander," the animal ran toward him. Yes, after being left, after staying alone, it ran toward him. Yes, Pel. Not away. She let the silence sit. Because that was the part that language almost couldn't carry. Every species she'd ever studied, every predator, every prey animal pushed past its comfort, moved away from the source of control when given freedom. That was biology. That was self-preservation. That was 100 million years of survival instinct. Duke ran toward, the source of all commands, the one who controlled his movements, his position, his stillness. Toward him, first, without hesitation. Pelavix exhaled slowly. What does a species do to an animal to make it feel that way? Veth-Oran watched Marcus crouch down, letting Duke press his enormous head under his chin. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly the wrong question." Pelavix looked at her. "The right question," she continued, "is what kind of species is capable of it?" The room felt different after that. Neither of them spoke for a long time.
That night, Veth-Oran couldn't sleep. This was unusual. Veth-core physiology demanded rest with a rigidity that most species envied. 6 hours, precise, non-negotiable. Her body simply shut down. It always had. Not tonight. She lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about wolves. Specifically, she thought about what a wolf was before humans found it. Apex predator, cooperative hunter, intelligent, suspicious, territorial, built over millions of years to survive in a world that constantly tried to kill it. Every instinct honed toward one purpose, staying alive. And then humans had arrived. Not stronger, not faster, not armed with anything a wolf couldn't theoretically overcome, just present, persistent, offering something the wolf's entire evolutionary history had never encountered as a survival strategy. Warmth, consistency, the radical, irrational act of caring without expectation of reciprocal advantage. And the wolf, slowly, across generations, one brave or desperate or simply curious individual at a time, had walked toward the fire. Veth-Oran sat up in the dark. She'd been framing this wrong, entirely wrong. She'd been cataloging Duke as a subject, a case study in domestication, a fascinating biological artifact of human civilization. But Duke wasn't the artifact. The relationship was. She pulled up her research terminal and began typing, fast, the way she only did when something was pulling at her that she hadn't fully named yet. The Veth-core domesticated the Groon through isolation and controlled fear response conditioning. The Paleth domesticated the shore crawler through resource dependency. The Marin used chemical bonding agents in food sources across 6 generations. Every known domestication model in galactic records operates on the same foundational principle. The domesticated animal must need the domesticating species for survival. The human model is anomalous. She paused, read it back. Duke does not need Marcus to survive. Biologically, he is equipped to hunt, to find water, to regulate his own temperature. His survival systems are intact and functional. He has not been stripped of capability. He has not been made dependent through deprivation. He stays because he wants to stay. The question this raises is not biological, it is philosophical. What did humans offer the wolf that 15,000 years of evolution had never provided? She stopped typing, because she knew the answer. She'd known it since she watched Duke run across that deck, bypassing every survival instinct and press himself against Marcus's leg like that was the only place in the universe he wanted to be. Humans had offered belonging, not utility, not safety in the transactional sense, something older and stranger than either. The wolf had looked at a human and found, somehow, a pack. A different species, a different shape, a different sound and smell and way of moving through the world, and it had chosen them anyway. Veth-Oran set down the terminal. Her hands, she noticed, weren't entirely steady. Because she was a scientist, she dealt in data, in measurable outputs, in repeatable phenomena. And what she was feeling right now, sitting alone in the dark thinking about a human and his dog, was not measurable. It was something else entirely. Something that felt, uncomfortably, like awe. Tomorrow she had one more question for Specialist Reyes. She wasn't sure she was ready for the answer.
She asked it over morning rations. Liaison Reyes, if Duke were injured, seriously, critically, what would Marcus do? Elena didn't look up immediately. She wrapped both hands around her cup, the way humans did when a question landed somewhere personal. Then she looked up, and her eyes had changed quality, deeper, quieter. Everything, she said simply. He would do everything. Veth-Oran had expected that answer. She'd prepared for it. She thought she could absorb it clinically, file it under observed human emotional response to bonded animal, and move forward. She was wrong. Define everything, she said, because the scientist in her needed the edges of the thing. Elena set down her cup. Marcus once drove 4 hours in a storm, middle of the night, because Duke ate something and his stomach flipped. That's a condition that can kill a dog in hours. He didn't wait for morning, didn't calculate whether it was worth it. She paused. He just drove. 4 hours, in dangerous conditions, for an animal. For a creature that, by every metric of galactic civilizational logic, was a resource, a tool, a companion unit at best. He didn't hesitate, Veth-Oran said. He didn't even think about it, that's the point. Elena's voice was quiet but certain. You don't think about it. When it's Duke, when it's someone you love, you just move. Someone. Veth-Oran caught the word, held it. Elena had not said something, had not said the animal or the dog or even him. She had said someone. 15,000 years. That was what 15,000 years had built. Not just a domesticated predator, not just a loyal animal. A reclassification so deep it had restructured the human language of personhood itself. They hadn't simply tamed the wolf. They had expanded their definition of who mattered. And suddenly, with the specific electric clarity that only came when a scientist finally saw the full shape of something, Veth-Oran understood what had truly unsettled her from the beginning. It was never about Duke. Duke was extraordinary, yes, the bond was extraordinary, but that wasn't the thing that had kept her awake, that had made her secondary heart stutter, that had sent her typing in the dark like something was chasing her. It was this. Humans extended love across species barriers as naturally as breathing, without ideology, without philosophical framework, without being asked. They looked at something fundamentally different from themselves, different genetics, different language, different experience of the world, and they pulled it close. They had done it with the wolf. What would stop them from doing it again? What had stopped them? Veth-Oran looked through the observation glass. Marcus was there already, Duke pressed against his leg, both of them watching the slow star drift beyond the hull. 2 species, 1 window, complete, uncomplicated silence between them. She thought about first contact protocols, about the careful, centuries-long galactic debate over how to approach humanity, whether they were too volatile, too emotional, too unpredictably dangerous. They hadn't been wrong about dangerous. They'd just misunderstood the direction it cut.
Humans were dangerous the way gravity was dangerous, not because they destroyed, but because once you got close enough, escaping their pull became almost impossible. Duke hadn't escaped. Looking at Marcus now, Veth-Oran suspected she was beginning to understand why. She pressed her hand against the glass, and she didn't pull it away.